All right, everybody, welcome to another episode of the Nomad Strength Show. Today, I am joined by Greg Walsh of Wolf Brigade Gym out in New York State. Greg and I have messaged back and forth for, a handful of months now, probably going back to last summer, just through Instagram. And then we ended up meeting and hanging out at Summer Strong down in South Carolina a couple weeks ago. And we were kind of fascinated by the fact that it didn't seem like we didn't know each other in person when we hung out. Just was very natural, and we had a great time. Like, I don't know about you, but like some of my favorite conversations was just like walking around under the tents in the, dinner area and just chatting about stuff. And me and you kind of fell into that a handful of times, just getting lost in some conversations. So, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks so much. It was really nice to meet you in person, and you're right. It was pretty cohesive pretty quickly. That's unusual for me. So thanks for that. And it made me more excited to talk here. I think it would have been fun to do the talk there, but I think this is better. We've had a little minute to sit on it and figure out.
Yeah, for sure. I had all of the recording stuff with me down in South Carolina just in case the opportunity arose to, because there was going to be all kinds of rad people down there that I wanted to try and see if I could get any, some good conversations out of. And then I got down there and I ended up not really wanting to do that for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't want to, kind of for selfish reasons, I didn't want to remove myself from all the cool things that were happening and like take time. But then also I didn't want to, because of my feelings towards it, I didn't want to remove anybody else from that environment for an hour or whatever, to like pull them away from all the cool stuff that was happening. Cause there's just so much going on down there the whole time.
Yeah.
Like you just don't want to miss any of it. You know what I mean?
The distraction level was high. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah. So I think it'll be a much easier conversation now than like kind of the buzz that was going to be around us and pulling us away no matter what when we were down there.
I agree. Thank you.
Yeah. So, I messaged you when we were talking the other day and said, there's a little bit of crossover in the people that listen to this and then listen to Brandon on Peace, Love, and Meat and all that kind of stuff. So there's the small segment of people that have heard you on his show. But for those that haven't, can you give me, and rather than doing like the history of Greg kind of thing, the way I kind of like to ask the question is, can you give me some of what you would define as the important moments in your journey that led you to right now, rather than just like, I was 10 and did this, but like, what would you kind of consider would be the important moments?
Well, I mean, there's been a handful for sure, but I mean, the turning point paradigm shift stuff was when I was young and found BMX and hardcore music and really kind of walked off the beaten path a bit. Mm-hmm. While staying at least close enough to it to know what it looked like. My friends still played conventional sports and did a lot of conventional stuff, but I just kind of turned a different corner. And then working within the BMX industry in a small way here in Rochester. And then I guess really a turning point was in 1998. I got invited on a BMX trip called Road Fools. That's awesome. And they basically, they mirrored it kind of tongue in cheek off of the Road Rules series that was on MTV at the time. And they bought an entertainer's bus, and it ended up being Hank Williams III's former entertainer's bus, and piled a bunch of people on and made a movie out of it. And geez, it was really well received. So I got looked at by a lot of people that wouldn't have seen me otherwise. And then, but the more important thing that it led to was some quick friendships and an opportunity to go out to California, to Long Beach, California, and work for and then run a bike company. So I moved to California January of 1999, and to be totally honest, the role that I went out there for shifted really quickly, and I ended up doing a lot. So the role evolved into a leadership and management role, and I put my pants on and got it done and did a really, really good job. So that was a turning point in the sense that it gave me an opportunity to reach a ton of people and meet people that I never otherwise would have met. And, people that were heroes of mine and that I was childhood fans of, I was now, going to skate parks with and things like that. And then on the flip side of things, people that I'd seen in the martial arts context, I could go train at their gyms now. So that moving to California was gigantic. the opportunities that I immediately fell into with training out there were gigantic. And as we've talked about briefly, I think part of the journey from then on through martial arts and strength and conditioning and things like that is not coming into either of those things from a conventional framework. And so with our gym in Long Beach, even early days, we just had a different viewpoint on it. You know, we were problem solvers. We were troubleshooters. And so we evolved that way. My process in strength and conditioning has always been find a problem, fix it. The 360-degree model, kind of 3D model situation. And from then, the next big turning point, we had some other projects going on here back in Rochester, New York, and a print shop and several small brands and things like that. I had transitioned out of the large company that I was running in mid 2004. That could be a podcast of its own, I imagine. But by the time 2008 came around, my instructors, my partners in the gym in California, were one was going deeper into law enforcement. The other was going deeper into more kind of private training and Kali and things like that. And so, although it was maybe the most difficult professional decision, I decided to move back to Rochester. Also knowing at that point that what I wanted to do with strength and conditioning would not have been possible in Long Beach. I knew what Wolf Brigade needed to be, and Long Beach at the time, especially, was just not the right platform for it. So I moved back to New York in 2008, and I mean, I guess the rest is history. But Wolf Brigade has been a thing since the day I landed in New York in 2008. We started teaching classes in a schoolyard,
nice.
on a playground, and that's what we did for the first 4 or 5 months.
That's awesome. I want to go back to the Bmx days, because like I had mentioned to you in messages before, like that time, and when you think about like that time period when you were involved in that, like that late 90s, that was like the time when that became a thing. Well, like when that blew up, right?
So to be honest, and not to play my hand, but getting involved with that really young at like 12 years old, I was involved with that in the 80s. I was involved. I mean, it was the evolutionary process. There were eras of it before me, that's for sure. But when it really started to come into its own and transition away from more flashy, fluorescent freestyle type stuff into BMX street riding and you know, things like that look a lot more like today. I was involved in all of those transitions. I was a part of the culture and also the industry in those transitions. And man, talk about a fast learning curve for small business, for just culture. Watching something like that evolve, and also in a very similar way, watching something like hardcore evolve around that same time, it just taught me these really kind of unlearnable lessons in any other way other than being immersed like that.
There was a really cool excerpt from, and I want to say it's Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, where he talks about the idea where certain people were going to do these certain things because of the environments and the time period that they were in, and like the environments they grew up in, the locations. Like if you look at all the tech guys, like the Bill Gates, the Steve Jobs, all of those guys, all were young college dudes in the 70s in like Seattle area, right? And they, I mean, like it was just this environment at the time was primed and perfect to create what they were doing, because they were at the very beginning. They were the ones that were learning how to code at the same, like basically creating all this stuff, but they were all the same age. It was all the same time period. They were all in the same area. And so when you think about it like that, like I'm thinking like Southern California in the like mid to late 90s for that kind of thing. Like that was right around the time that the X Games kind of became big, right? Like that was the real kind of turn for that, which brought all of those extreme sports kind of like a little bit more mainstime, right? And so like you
very true.
Yeah, I mean, you think like just the time period of it was super important.
Certainly. I mean, the first X Games was in Providence, Rhode Island, and we were there for that. That was while I was still living here in New York, and the turning points, you know, between the smaller but still large independent contests that people like Matt Hoffman ran and things like that, and Ian Morris over in the UK, they really set the tone, and then people like me knew that that's what I wanted to do with what I had opportunities to do, and then that's what we did. So we ran that brand. And then we also put on large-scale BMX contests. They were called La Revolution, and we did those in a bunch of different places, and they were tremendous, man. I mean, the response was tremendous. The riding was amazing. I became pretty good at announcing contests. Got to do a few in Europe. Got to do one in Canada. And part of that, just I guess to circle back and then move forward is part of that came from the fact that I've been booking hardcore since I was maybe 15 or 16 years old. I think the first thing that we did under the Hell on Earth banner was maybe 1995, and something like that. So all of it was kind of, if it didn't exist, we made it. If it did exist and we thought we could sharpen it up, then we went from there. And that's carried right with me into training people, especially.
So where did because that's a totally different world altogether than strength and conditioning. Like
could not be more different. If the
polar opposites.
If the version of me today were to talk to the version of me then and said that what I do on a daily basis is watch people's hips move, and hyper assess positional details of movement and weightlifting, and teach cops how to choke each other, man, that kid would have laughed me right off the stage. I'll tell you that.
So at what point did that become something that you began to pursue?
Violence was a part of hardcore, and so especially coming up early with it, like I did here, Rochester in particular, the areas around us. I mean, I was not a stranger to that stuff, but I was a skinny little weirdo, and so eventually I figured out that one thing that I liked about it is some of the strategy and some of the energy. And so I started pursuing martial arts. The first formal martial art, I wrestled a little bit when I was in middle school and stuff, but the first formal martial art I took was Aikido here in New York before I moved to California, and learned quickly that just wasn't for me. That's cool and all, but it just wasn't what I was looking for. But it's what I could afford, and it's what was down the street. And then when I got to California, I got into a very good Kempo karate place in Long Beach. My instructor was moonlighting as a grappler, so he and I grappled privately. So he probably would have gotten in some heat had his instructors and the owners of the Kempo gym known that he was teaching me jiu-jitsu. Right. But and then really it kind of snowballed from there. What I started realizing was, based on some of the bang-ups I had already had from BMX and things like that, I had to do more than simply train martial arts. I had to insulate and improve myself to perform these tasks, especially if I was going to perform them simultaneously. I mean, I was still riding bikes all the time, doing Kempo and then wrestling, grappling. So it got to be a lot. I realized that I had to find something else, and then honestly, that my gym, what I call my gym in California, I walked into in 2003, and that's where we ended up having Muay Thai. That's where we had grappling, CSW, so Eric Paulson's system. We were Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu under Kleber Luciano. We were Sayak Kali, and then we were CrossFit Long Beach. My instructors did some Savat. They were not dabblers. They were the people that predicated my terminology of expert generalism. They were phenomenal at each of those disciplines, and they seamed them up in ways that geez, they were just I could sit here and go on about them for hours. Without them, my life would not look anything like what it does. They had such a sense for what was important and what wasn't. They had such a finely tuned bullshit meter, and that was really one of the most valuable things. I learned quickly that some of what I had learned in Kempo was usable and transferable, and a lot of it wasn't. but that almost everything I was learning in grappling was transferable in some way or another. And so that really landed for me, as I was like, okay, this is working all the time. Then, then you circle back and you start saying, okay, well, my instructors are a lot better than me. I'm a little bit stronger than them, and I can start feeling that playing field level a little bit. What's the next steps here? Well, it's to balance your technique and your strength and your power proficiency. And so from then on, it was just this hunt to make that kind of little perfect animal,
Yeah. And again, just the timelines are just fascinating to me, because back in, like, this was early 2000s, you had said. So
yes, please.
Jiu-jitsu, like, nobody knew what that was really back then, like on a large, scale, like where it is taking over things now. Because I mean, mixed martial arts and UFC, like, was barely a thing back then. It was still super underground, which, plays right into kind of your whole life story anyways, being kind of underground with a lot of stuff. So it makes sense that you were plugged into stuff like that. But it's just such a cool, like, thing that you were there so far early in the beginning. But at that time period.
And I appreciate and am so pleased and proud to have been around that stuff when I was. However, when I look at it, I look back at the fact that when I first was introduced to CSW, Eric Paulson had already been fighting in Shuto for many years, and like some of the legendary like origins of MMA, when they still had to call it pancration to compete amateur in California. And so, and then people like some of the Brazilian jiu-jitsu guys and even our instructor Kleber from Huntington Beach were black belts before black belts even seemed to make sense in America, and so I never look at myself as at the front of anything, but I believe in a way with each of the things that we've touched on, up to mixed modality fitness, and I guess we can get there in a minute. But I've come into the second wave of what I believe were each of those things, and I believe that gave me an excellent opportunity to look at what people had done well and done poorly, and then either adapt or adjust or just absorb and apply.
Totally. It still would be considered like in the early adopter stage.
Absolutely. That I absolutely do believe. And there was nothing so fully formed yet that there were not improvements that could be made to make it better and make it more usable and transferable.
Which is cool, because it gave you, like you said, the opportunity to take some of those things and improve on them in your way, and kind of create this, branch of your stuff from these very early, roots. Right. And,
well, really very much so. And, it was fun to have. I mean, my instructors, again, like one of my instructors, Joe Pena, was so incredible at judo that he had trained in Japan. He had done that his entire life, but he had this hybridized judo because he'd been training with Eric Paulson, and he'd been training with Dan Inosanto, and he'd been training with Arjan Chai, and so he had this just phenomenal grappling style that he imparted on me, and to this day, I'm so thankful. Like, I was one of the few people outside of his son that we really just trained together a lot. And geez, I mean, I couldn't be taught that again. And one thing that I've always taken away from it is, as much as I've been banged up and I'm certainly not 20 and all this kind of stuff, when I do go and grapple and things like that, it's never like I'm some fish out of water to a point where I shouldn't be in the room. And I give them 100% full credit for that. They always called it hardwiring me. And I've just always taken to that term. I've got a couple people here in our training that I believe I've done that too. And they're just it makes you just this unshakable thing. It's almost it's subconscious. It's second nature.
That's so cool. The thing that I think is cool about, again, in that time frame, when you began that journey into the strength and conditioning piece in building those pathways essentially to where it is now, you've been using a mace since like around that time. Like, when was your mace introduced? Like around that same time?
So we were like, I always forget the number, and I should probably care, but I don't. We were like 28. We were like CrossFit Long Beach was like number 28 or 38 or something.
Yeah.
I
Top
guess the
50,
takeaway,
first 50. That's a pretty big deal.
The takeaway would be not number 4,960.
Right.
So we got to see kind of the evolutionary process of that too. And that was, that may be a separate branch of the conversation that would be a little more fun, but we'll circle back to the mace thing for a minute. 2005, I'd been looking at a lot of grappling at that point. I kind of deep dove into grappling for the handful of years before that, ever since my Kempo instructor, Carlos Macias, had been teaching me. And I came up on this guy, Jake Shannon. He was an old catch wrestling guy, worked with Carl Gotch, worked with all these legends, Billy Robinson, Josh Barnett. And, of course, I'd seen the mace, but I'd seen it in almost like a mystical type of context, and he was the first one that made the round ball handle through that company, Torque Athletic. They're gone now, but the early maces he made were with Torque, and so I went down and trained with him in his gym in San Clemente in like maybe 2005, and he'd be the first one to say that it was not a technique-driven practice at that time.
Right.
And so the mace had been proven valuable in a million different ways, but there wasn't really any type of like full-on system and organization to it.
Yeah.
So at that point, I was like, man, I'm sold on this thing. I'm sold on Jake. He's a great dude. He's a tremendous grappling source of knowledge. And then the mace landed with me because as soon as I started moving it felt like grappling. This level of discooperation felt like a body. It felt like a person. And so in Long Beach at that time, we started kind of detailing it out. I was using it a lot. I was probably a little bit prematurely, but teaching people how to use it in some ways as I was starting to become a trainer and teaching people other ways. And then realistically that kind of evolved into having to change some kettlebell stuff up. And really from there, it kind of just snowballed. We love the barbell. People think that we're some like mace quirky kettlebell situation.
Anti-barbell.
we use barbells all week, every week, forever. Heavy, well. We just don't show a lot of it because it's low hanging fruit. The people do the barbell stuff great. They move better with barbells than people that move barbells.
Right.
But the nuance and the kind of the devil in the detail is what we've managed to do with kettlebell and mace stuff.
Yeah.
So, and some of those adaptations I believe were made for me. Like my right wrist had been broken several times. That I guess to circle back again quickly, the trip that I got invited on in 1998. At the time, my wrist was broken, so my choice was. Pass up what could be this opportunity of a lifetime for a nobody from Rochester, New York, or break this cast off, tape my arm and go on the trip. and so, that's what I did. But coming down to front racking a barbell many years later, maybe that was not my best choice. So I had to adapt a bunch of kettlebell positions and weights to get to the point where the kettlebell would be a suitable complement to a barbell, weight wise and positionally and things like that. So that's kind of how those pieces evolved.
Yeah, and it's always so funny to me now because I think I started messing around with the mace, I want to say 5-ish years ago. So I mean, not very long by any means at all, but really, and this came from
that's long enough, man.
And it came from I had a friend who was one of the first certified coaches that On It did with the mace specialty, and was in this area and came back and showed me a couple of things, and like that same thing, like you hold it for that first time and you start moving it around and you're like, okay, there's something different about this, there's something to this, and there's so many different methodologies and practices with this tool, but I always think it's so funny like that it's almost become branded as this new thing when the tool itself is like 3,000 years old, right? Like,
I mean, truly, like one of the things that we dove into was what the Indian wrestling cultures would do with these maces, and there was I've mentioned them in a previous talk somewhere. Is there's these 2 DVDs called The Physical Body, and it's just this guy went to India and started just investigating these wrestling cultures and watching what they did and taping their training and stuff like that. And man, I don't know. I just was so fascinated with those, the simplicity, but also just the detail. You watch them move and it was just surgical. And that really lands with me. I've never been a more for the sake of more guy, whether it be weight or volume or anything else. And so watching people with bodies that looked like that performed that way with these supremely unmanageable tools, and really, there's no I guess competition between styles with things like this. But one thing that I have seen an awful lot of that I definitely do not like is the fact that because the mace is so challenging to use, and most people have not deep dove into people like us that have actually detailed it out as a strength tool, it's really easy to charlatanize that thing, because even if you just pick it up, it feels tough. So you simply put that in someone's hands and say, hey, stand here for 10 seconds, close your eyes, chew your gum a little faster, stand on one foot. All of a sudden you've got a mace program, because the mace by nature is going to make that difficult. But that's clearly not the end of the story.
Right. Well, and it ties in with the kettlebell stuff too, because a lot of people look at kettlebells, that don't come from kettlebell culture, right? Like that's kind of its own subset of fitness, but people that look at it as they think like it's just this weird lightweight thing I use for conditioning purposes, right? It's a different conversation when you're talking about it, using it as a heavy strength implement that requires some serious technique and maneuverability to understand how the thing moves, and hand placement on the handles and the horns, no matter what you're doing. Like, it's a legitimate strength tool. And I don't think that gets utilized enough in that way. And that's why, like, I sent you that video when I got my 48 kilo bell a week or so ago.
Yeah,
like,
awesome.
I mean, I had messed with some 70 something pounds, but I pretty much stayed in the 24 kilo bell range for pretty much everything I do, presses, rows, all that kind of stuff. And I never really wrestled quite literally with a super heavy bell like that, that 48 kilo. And I spent maybe 30 minutes just that first day, like, okay, let's just see how I feel doing all these things I would normally do. And it's legitimately harder than pretty much anything else you can do with it, heavy barbell or whatever it is. You know what I'm saying?
Well, and that's why they're both phenomenal complements and supplements. And you're right. People do relegate the kettlebell to a conditioning tool. And in my opinion, also, it's because they haven't deep dove into anything that we do. Once they do, they will. Because what it's also causing and creating is a level of proficiency and ownership over a barbell, which is inherently a more stable and easier to maneuver implement. That's fascinating. I mean, the ways that we build midline stability exceed beyond kettlebells and maces, but using those tools the way that we use them, our people are bulletproof. I mean, they're impervious to harm, and it's because we're insulating every single aspect of the position, both with positional acuity and enough weight to actually be useful. And a lot of that, when you combine that, it really becomes kind of a powerful tool that's a little bit sleepy. And I still don't know necessarily if people quite pick up what we're laying down. They're starting to. But for example, like what you said, 48 kilo, we've been tinkering with every little tiny element of positional optimization with kettlebells, maces, everything for a very long time. Of course, bodyweight stuff and barbell too. But the biggest ground to cover was kettlebells and maces. And so even tinkering more recently, like we have with height of front rack position, now that we've adjusted to, we were the first ones that ever really lifted anything tangible in a pistol grip or a stacked hand grip. I got a lot of flack from old timers on that. And my response was, any tradition that's not mirrored by modern function is a waste of my time. And so when I have a 165-pound kid double kettlebell front squatting two 97-pound kettlebells for multiple reps with perfect positioning, and a room full of people, no one with a Turkish get up less than half their body weight, that still look like lean, normal,
Yeah.
like people that would stay within a weight class in a fighting modality.
Yep.
Man, you're onto something. And then when you look at the transferability to things like barbell, I mean, it's just really fun to seam it all up in those ways. And I believe that people that are truly hunting strength, safety, proficiency, and they're willing to put a little time in, man, there's a lot of ground to cover with the kettlebell.
And it's and one of the things was always so fascinating to me was this idea that you don't need to do the barbell to get better at the barbell. Like that's almost just an expression of the strength that you've built doing all of these other things. And I've gone through months and months of phases of training where I never even touched one, and just would work on my mobility, just, work of active range mobility, work on things with heavy kettlebells and all these other things, and work rotational strength and all these positional things, with weight in weird positions with limbs fully extended and being strong in these extended limb positions. And then you come back to the barbell and it's like you've lost nothing. And at that time you're also doing it without crushing yourself under the load of a barbell that people tend to put themselves under.
I mean, I believe the two things you found is that you had begun optimizing the movement pattern, and you were training slightly beyond functional barbell end ranges safely. And so both of those things transfer to the bar seamlessly. However, the bar does not create either of those things and transfer them back to the kettlebell or the mace.
Right.
And so if people jump into positional acuity and really detailing things out, and they work on how to maneuver heavy kettlebells, man, the amount of strong jocks that we've seen come into our place that eschew kettlebells before they even really know what they're doing, because they try and rip it off the ground with their bicep, and they get frustrated that they can't lift 45 pounds, and this 112-pound girl next to them is cleaning her body weight for reps with a kettlebell. They lose interest. But really, for people like that especially, it's a miracle cure. You can recover years of, either bad movement pattern or, like even just bad neural adaptation, where your body just doesn't think it can go somewhere anymore, but it does, and it can. It just hasn't.
Yeah.
Those are the trapdoors,
Yeah, you just got to reteach those patterns, because your body your body wants to be in full range of motion and have these movement patterns expressed in strong ways. And, for a myriad of lifestyle reasons, we tend to lose a lot of that capacity, but it doesn't mean it's never recoverable. It's all retrainable.
It's always important to mention our people. We train extremely normal people, and many of them have turned a corner into something truly abnormal. And we have some high performers that are high level military, law enforcement, martial artists, professional athletes, things like that. But the overwhelming percentage are just hardworking, normal people that like the idea of something like CrossFit, but are disgusted by the current execution or adaptations of it, as they should be, and want something more. And so if they're willing to come in and kind of bury their noses in it for a bit, I mean, we've got people up until their 60s that are performing things that I've only seen a handful of people half their age perform. We've got, one of my favorite people ever. He's been with us for almost 10 years, 60 years old. He's got 106-pound Turkish get up on each side, and I mean, it's not a wiggly mess. It's like this sharp Turkish get up. It looks the same at 50 pounds as it does at 100 pounds. Other people in their 50s and 60s that are just, I mean, you would watch them move, you would watch the weights they move, and even as someone that sees it on a regular basis, it shocks me every time. Getting off the ground cleanly, no hands, like just really, really great positioning, widely transferable stuff. And man, it looks like they just bled years off their lives every time they're in there. It's awesome.
And one of the terms that you've used a couple of times and that you use that I love is the word insulation. And that is, I think, such a cool visual way to approach the style of training. So where did that word kind of come in that you like visualize that being a good idea?
As I mentioned quickly, man, that was my whole purpose in entering into strength and conditioning as a separate modality for myself. I wanted to fight better. I wanted to ride better. I didn't want to hurt as much as I did. Mm-hmm. And so I started realizing that if I didn't get stronger and start addressing those things, you know, I mean, I had worked out. I'm doing air quotes right now. Since I moved to California, right. You know, there was a little gym down the street from my house, and I had a membership there, and I would go and use the rowing machine and use the, you know, whatever sciencey assisted pull-up machine they had and stuff. But I didn't really know what I was doing. But then I started jumping into it differently. Of course, they would do a conditioning portion of karate class and things like that. So I started getting a sense of what I didn't know. And then once I walked into our place in 2003, man, I deep dove into that right alongside, because the other thing that I knew is when I did it right, or well, at least what I was starting to perceive as right, it felt like martial arts. I was paying attention to the details in the same way. I was aligning all the same dots. And then, you know, holy shit, believe it or not, it started improving martial arts right alongside the strength and conditioning. So that's something that has also been really challenging to land. And again, maybe even a separate conversation, but certainly a factor for this one is, with all due respect, of course, professional mixed martial artists, most still have no idea what they're leaving on the table. I should not have a room full of normal people in Rochester, New York, outperforming the best workers in the UFC Performance Institute. And I'm not saying they're harder workers. I'm not saying they're more dedicated or anything. I'm just saying positional optimization is truly the king of the fucking mountain when it comes to keeping people safe and well insulated. And no one needs to be more safe and well insulated than a professional athlete, especially someone who's getting in a fist fight for money. So the insulation thing came from me wanting to be better at the things that I really cared about, and then evolved into me really caring about how to get people better at those things. You know, just strength and conditioning was means to an end.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of how he phrases it, but one of my favorite ways of visualizing, like when you say leaving performance on the table, right? I think it was Kelly Starrett. He uses this phrase, dumping torque. Like if you're not positionally where you need to be. And that just, for me, triggers such a visual experience of like what, you know, it makes perfect sense. Like you're dumping torque out if you're not in a positional optimized space.
He's someone I have a gigantic amount of respect for. We've had a few conversations over the years, but I've followed his stuff since the first moment it came out. And another
the original 10-minute squat video on YouTube.
I've watched it 50 times and I learned something every time.
Yep.
I mean, another phrase he used is bleeding force.
Yes.
And so I stole that. I still give him credit when I say it too often, as I do with everyone that I've ever learned anything important from, because anyone that doesn't do that is an asshole. But the bleeding force concept resonates quickly with people. You know, when we talk about bracing, and we're very specific about, you know, things like a big fat belly brace. You know, sure, there's nuance and weekend clinics you can get into on how to brace.
Right.
But realistically, if you're breathing up and not breathing down, your midline is fallible. So when we teach it with brevity, it's a big fat belly brace and your head is neutral. And then one of the things we see quickly with people is when they miss one of those things, or they brace during, not before, or something like that, they can very clearly see in themselves or others force bleed. And it's just his terminology for some of that stuff. I mean, I don't know how long he thought about it, or if it just kind of came out because he really understands his craft, but man, it
just paints such a good visual picture. You know what I'm saying?
Perfect.
Like if you,
it is unimprovable terminology.
Yeah, like you said, I think that might be just a gift of his on top of his brilliance. His way of communicating is just awesome and hilarious and makes perfect sense. One of the things that I was thinking about the other day was when we were down at Summer Strong, and they had, you know, outside they had all these like the grip gauntlet and all these tools that were kind of like in the outside training area, and they had this this, I don't even know if we'd call it a mace, like, because it was you have to, because that was the most similar thing to it, but it was, real short handle on the bottom, but then these like small ball, big ball, big ball, big ball as you go up higher. And it looks almost like just a giant dog toy, because I've seen dog toys that look like that. It really but like I
was really hoping that's what you were going to say, because that's what I was thinking.
But it was 30 pounds, and it was just so fun, because you mentioned like Bo Sandoval was there, and you work with him and his wife, and we were swinging around doing some 360s. And one of the things that you said that it was just hilarious to me, like, you're like, I love it when I get to watch you and Bo and Amanda swing this mace, and then I get to watch everybody else watch you swing this mace, because it just like eyes turn, and like there's people there that have they're opening up this door that's like they didn't even understand what they were looking at, and they just start peering, and then but if all it does is spark that curiosity, like that's a win. But I just love that where you're just watching people watch us swing, and then like you see like these people like turn their heads and they're like looking around like, what the is that thing?
It could not be more true, and part of my enjoyment / amusement with it is, of course, it wasn't even a normal mace.
Yeah.
A normal mace would have still garnered attention, because most people do not move maces well, and even fewer move them powerfully. But that thing looks so intimidating, and I honestly I didn't know that it was 30 pounds. I'm sure it is. That feels right. But the other thing that was so interesting about it is there was drag on it, like it felt slow, and part of it is just that amount of size and things like that. It felt different than 30 pounds in a cool way. But it also looked like something totally interesting and phenomenal. So when people were watching, I think maybe the only takeaway on the downside is they were probably looking at that like, oh, those weirdos brought that,
right,
or something. You know what I mean? Because like, who's just gonna pick in that entire field of amazing equipment? Who's gonna pick that up and start just maneuvering it around? But I really did enjoy that. I was really stoked to see that there, because I as much as I was really I don't know. I didn't bring our tools out of respect for Sorinex. They have plenty of stuff, and what they do is totally incredible. But even the conversations that I was having with people there, man, they were interested, and so, Bo and I and Amanda hadn't never met in person yet. So we had some boxes to check. And so we went out in the lot and fooled around with some things. But the amount of curiosity there was with that weird tool tells me that this thing hopefully will crack open in the right ways soon, and people will start understanding that if what they want is performance improvement, there is no more direct path than the proper combination of barbell, kettlebell, and mace lifting. The end. And then properly positioned body weight stuff and appropriate conditioning is really what kind of seals the package.
And it's when you say it in that way, it sounds like the most simple equation that there is. There's obviously, simple, not easy, right? There's a difference.
And I guess I can expand on that. And this is as far outside humility as you'll ever catch someone like me. But the reason that it sounds so simple, but that very few understand it, is that we have put so many details and developmental pieces in play with the mace and the kettlebell that it wouldn't make sense to almost anybody else. Right. In 2008, when I moved back here, it was the first time anyone had ever swung a mace in the front plane. So one of our primary accessory and conditioning tools is mace front pendulums and things like that. And the amount of lateral stability, oblique stability, no more of those weird sideways sit-ups, understanding of power timing, upper back development. The front pendulum is one of the lowest risk, highest reward movements ever. And no one had ever done it. And very, very few people still do. Even fewer do it heavy enough to be useful. The reason that some of the kettlebell adaptations were necessary is that our people were very, very good at moving kettlebells in a more traditional position, the internal rotation, all that kind of stuff. And I've been through all those certifications. We don't have to go through the amount of paper I have, but it's plenty. I've trained with the finest people in the world, and I respect them very much, most of them. But at a certain point, what we had done is exhausted the potential of that position.
Yeah.
So what we had to do then is, okay, if we want to lift more kettlebells in better ways to insulate and improve what else we want to do in strength and conditioning, we have to adapt.
Yeah.
We have to figure something out. So we started turning the hand, and I started realizing that even when you turn the hand a little bit, and then all of a sudden when you get up closer to a pistol grip, you've got better lat engagement, you've got better posture. The internal rotation we cover with mace swinging. So the only argument that I've ever heard from a kettlebell purist that was anything resembling respectful was, how do you train internal rotation? Well, maces train internal rotation, and so do excellently performed bodyweight movements. So what we did is, once we made that shift, we just didn't turn back, and now we have people single kettlebell front squatting triple digits that are under the weight of the kettlebell. We have people with truly provably the heaviest versions of those kettlebell lifts ever performed in our normal little place in Rochester.
And this is probably going to be a little bit more of a technical couple of questions, because they just came up when you were describing a lot of that stuff just now. And the first one has to do with the mace, because this is something that I was actually meaning to ask in terms of the build of the mace, because you guys make your own that you use, and you're very specific on length of the shaft of the mace and that kind of stuff. But yours also has like a knob on the bottom of the handle, like a baseball bat would. And the one that I have doesn't. It's just straight shaft down from the end of the mace, the ball of the mace. Is there a positional advantage to having that down at the bottom to do anything with, or is that just like a comfort thing that you've found makes a couple of things easier?
Well, we think so. The only reason we weren't going to put a cap on the end, and one of the reasons that many years ago when we started this project, we tried to put one on that was a little bit removable, is for people that are doing Scottish hammer throw, and it ended up just being, that would have been a little bit too costly to accommodate a very small group, and they still throw ours, which is fine. But one thing I like about the end cap is it gives a perfect index point, and it also gives confidence, because we begin even beginners, because of how well we teach and how specific we are. We can begin a beginner with an 8 kilogram mace, possibly a little bit lighter sledgehammer to ingrain some of the technique and positioning. And so that end cap really just ends up a perfect index point when you're actually lifting heavy enough maces to be useful, in our opinion. And it also just gives, another unsung hero of the mace lifts is making sure that with everything you're doing, you're switching your top to bottom hands in an even rep scheme in both directions. So once there's proficiency developed, you can switch your hands really quickly and powerfully. And the index point is just really a perfect way to do that. The hand switch thing is important, one, because you're developing strength differently anytime you're in a different position. And two, especially with 10-2s and 360s and stuff, the top hand is compressed another 3 inches from the bottom hand. So anyone that gets hot elbows from mace lifting, if you haven't switched your hands top to bottom, we just solved the mystery. And so practice both directions, both hand positions, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And this one is more, I guess, theoretical on your experimental side of things, because you've got so much, like you had said, you've got all of these baselines that you guys have created over the years, and like your specific ways that you teach everything. How much experimenting or testing or like trying to explore new avenues is still happening? Like, I mean, you mentioned you're messing with some different positional things in front rack, but like how much of that still exists to add into the current, system?
Every day, man.
Yeah.
I teach anytime I'm here, I'm teaching something every single day. Which means I'm learning something every single day. And for me, while being strong is always going to be a high priority for me, max strength is not my high priority. I've had 2 back surgeries. One was wrong, fucked up my left foot. So I'm well in possession of the knowledge that there is, from a big strength standpoint, there's just so strong I'm going to be. But one thing I can never be is too technical or too positionally proficient. So I'm tinkering with stuff all the time. The nice thing is I've got a focus group of people that we have we have beyond clearly proven that tinkering is worthwhile. So if I practice something on myself for a while and it works, I put it on others. If the leaders and some of the trainers and the high performers in our place, it lands on them, then I start transferring into the group, and then we assess and address what we see. It's a really evolutionary process in a very similar way that some martial arts are, and that's not a coincidence. It's not an accident or oversight. I have no goal with this thing other than it being the best mixed modality training program that has ever existed.
Well, and you bring up a good point, tying it back into your journey through the martial arts piece, because one of the things that we had talked about before was that actually served you quite well on the business side of things as well, coming in through the non-traditional fitness avenues to get into the fitness space, right? Like most people that are gym owners or whatever, they did like the kinesiology thing in college, and like they were trainers at these gyms, and then they get their things, and they have friends that want to help them open a gym. I mean, like there's usually like a lot of similarities in people's paths that open up studios and gyms and stuff like that. And you came in like just from above, just dropping a bomb onto these things from a completely opposite realm of the world.
Yes and no. So I believe that it gave us an advantage in keeping the right-minded people.
Yeah.
But as I don't have to sell you, details are not sexy.
Yeah.
And so a lot of times what we do gets overlooked by people that just want to be XYZ. They want to be, whatever. It's been largely cast off by anyone that loves, quote unquote, CrossFit as a brand, simply because CrossFit has broken people's brains on what detail and training should be. And martial artists really haven't just yet grown to see what it can be for their training yet.
Yeah.
That is in process finally now. We've finally gotten some people in that are grapplers. Their grappling is improving at such exponential rates that this thing is about to crack. And if it doesn't, I'll go to my grave trying, because I think that's a worthwhile path. But even people like Brandon, even people like our friend John in Florida, people that are not 20 years old that are beginning to excel beyond any reasonable expectations in grappling. So yes, in a sense, coming from an outside framework gave me an advantage in developing a unique business.
Yeah.
And one that is bullshit free and integrity driven and will never stop evolving. But those things are not financial. Those things are not financially successful paths. If I had a conventionally normal life, or when I had moved back to New York, had high demand on making money on the fitness project, man, I would have struck out hard.
Yeah.
People do not flock to something that is detail oriented in the ways that we do until they actually feel what the details can buy them, and then we're good, But
we're good.
My business background has always been very much like that.
Yeah.
I was even speaking with someone last night that I've known for a long time, and we were talking about the fact that quality and integrity has never been our limiting factor, but it's always just been consistency in the marketplace. The things that we've done, we're either, I say with humility, ahead of the curve or something, but they were either unsustainable for financial reasons, right, or the people that were helping us drive it let us down or something like that. The gym is different in the sense that because I've been through those hurdles and I've had a lot of really viable projects go south based on the irresponsibility of others. While I love every single person that trains and works in our gym and helps me, if tomorrow they all got on a boat and left and never came back, the gym would still open every day because nothing can stop it because it's me.
Right. Yeah.
So that's what I learned from failing a lot is eventually you build something that no one can take from you.
Well, I'm glad you just brought up the failing a lot thing, because that was where my mind was going, because this is one of the things that you and I talked about down in South Carolina. And this came from again, to bring it back into the extreme sports and the BMX world, the learning curve and the evolution of certain things in that realm specifically is so intense and so fast, how fast things evolve in that world because of the amount of failure that happens when you're in the BMX world. I mean, like, it's all about who's the biggest and baddest and can do the craziest stuff, right? And the repeated failure and how often it happens continues to move those boundaries much faster than a lot of other industries would evolve. I mean, we gave the example of like 99 or whatever it was when Tony Hawk hit the first 900 in the X Games or whatever. And then like in 2016, like an 11-year-old did it, you know, and it's just like, I mean, and in that relatively short period of time, it's light years ahead of where it was. And most industries don't move like that. And so I think you coming from that and applying that same mentality to the things that you're doing in the gym and strength and conditioning gives you a little bit of a different edge over the things that are like, well, we're, you know, yes, there's these foundational things that we've done for 100 years, but at some point there needs to be a little bit more evolution. You know what I'm saying?
That's a really sharp observation, man. I hadn't framed it exactly like that, but I agree with you 100% because I've said many times, and I kind of laugh about it. Watching BMX now, to me, even though it's something I've been involved with for many, many years, is like watching a movie. It's like watching a video game. You know, the amount of technical proficiency, the amount of risk, the amount of speed, the amount of unconventional athleticism that goes into what modern BMX riding has become is it's just astounding. It's astounding. You know, we've trained a few BMXers and they're really, really excellent. A couple of them professional riders, and their skill sets, having gone out riding with them and things like that, their skill sets are something that's hard for someone like me to even put into perspective, you know, because I can ride a bike, I can jump down things, I can grind things, I can turn around and do whatever. And it's cool. I was never this superlative bike rider. I always struggled with it. I fought hard. I learned what I learned. I got good enough to get where I needed to get. But now, I mean, it's the stuff that people would do at the end of a video part, maybe 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago, 10, 11 years ago, is now what they're doing on the way to the spot out of the car with like a drink in their hand, you know, and it really does go to exactly what you said, which is something that was so recently as maybe 15 years ago, revolutionary, 20 years ago, unheard of, is now the warm-up run. And man, it's failure based, but I also believe it's also just perception based. A really interesting thing that happened when the first Tony Hawk like pro skater game came out, and then subsequently like Matt Hoffman's pro BMX came out, is that right around that same time the concept of how high people could bunny hop changed like almost overnight. And you know, to us, and we've joked about it before, is a lot of it was just like, if I can make this little bike go that high with one little button, like why can't I just jump my bike on that? Do it in real life, you know? and so now it's interesting because, you know, a handlebar height bunny hop was always this kind of holy grail. You bunny hop a traffic cone, things like that. Those were these holy grails. And now, I mean, of course, it's like people just do that. It's like just normal. It's like a normal everyday occurrence.
And
fascinating.
But the mentality of that is what is so cool to me, because going into and being in that world, like it's like baseball, where, you know, if you're successful 30% of the time, you're a Hall of Famer. You know what I mean? Like in baseball, but like in this too, I mean, failure is a part of it. It's not like this thing that people are trying to move away from. You know, like in so many other ways, people are like bummed out if they miss something. And in every industry, it's like, if I don't hit this, like, damn, and they let it hit them emotionally and mentally. But like, you can't do that if you're in the BMX world, because just like, no, that's just okay. I can't do it that way now. I got to try and come back, or I'll just do it 30 more times until I get it. Like, most people don't have that understanding of progress through failure, which I think is one of the coolest things about that whole world.
Well, BMX is like baseball if every game you got hit with the baseball bat. Because you're right, and failure becomes this really profound teacher, because man, it just hurts. You know, I mean, it's not like a lot of people listening won't have had injuries, but I mean, if I were to start going down the list right now, I mean, I'd given myself stitches twice before I was 20 because I didn't have any health insurance, and the game was like, let's fix this thing and go back to what we were doing. You know, I mean, both of my fingers have been broken to the point where like there's no it wasn't something at the time you were like, oh, I'm hurt. You were like, oh, I can't ride. You know, so it's exactly what you said, which is you know, a painful learning curve wasn't a deterrent. It was just almost like it was almost just like a fact, you know, and I thought about that, but not till much more after the fact. You know, when I mean, I still ride and I still enjoy it and everything. I always will. But it wasn't until after I had stopped riding all the time and trying the hardest possible stuff I could that I started thinking about it in that way. If you weren't willing to suffer, you did not advance, and that's just the end of the story.
Yeah, and that's one of those ones, like you said, in that arena specifically, suffering is, I mean, quite literally very physical, right? I mean, there's the mental aspect of like being ticked off if you can't, like if you continue to fail at something, that'll begin to wear people down. But like in this, you know, you're talking about broken bones and like, you know, like legitimate painful things that like you need to be better at this, otherwise you're just gonna die, like, you know.
And I can't let this segment go without telling the story of one of my favorite things ever. I got to be a part of building, creating what I still believe is one of the top BMX videos ever made, called Nowhere Fast. When I got to California, the guy who's making the video, Dave Perrick, was someone I'd looked up to since I was a kid. He made the most tremendous videos of that era by long shot, not even close. I knew through the company that I went out there to work for that we could help him sell the shit out of that video. So we kind of just linked up and kicked ass and got this thing done. But the riding that he was filming at the time was so bananas, and people were so driven to finish their parts for this video, that risk reward was not even on the table. Like it was like, this is happening. The story is over. This kid, Ralph Sinisi, came out from New Jersey, who was in a very similar position to me, relatively unknown, understood what he had on his plate, and man, just went for it. Did all this crazy stuff. We were at UC Irvine. He was grinding a handrail. He jumped off his bike a little bit early and landed on the handrail below it on the inside of his femur, breaking his femur. So he broke his femur, essentially jumping downstairs onto a railing. His legs swelled up to the point where he couldn't get his underwear off. It looked like he had a small child's head on the inside of his leg. For the next week, I watched him tape his legs shut and take literally 50 ibuprofen a day and finish his video part for Nowhere Fast. I think we've still managed to sneak it. I don't want to say it, but I might be able to share that I may be able to share that video with your listeners. But if you watch the end of his part, Ralph Sinisi, anything in the last 60 seconds, maybe 90 seconds of his part was filmed with a broken femur in California. Underneath his pants was duct tape. And you know, it's so that just kind of plays into what we were just talking about, which is the fact that it just, there was no option on the table. He was out there for his part in a Dave Perrick video, and that what was happening. And that's the end of the story. And those types of things, I mean, I could share many more stories in that way from Hardcore and BMX, and where things either happened or they didn't based on forcing them to happen. And there's no way that hasn't influenced and informed how I've handled things since, you know. If I decide something's going to happen, it's going to fucking happen, man. And that's the end of it.
And that's one of those situations for him where it's like you said, this video's a big deal. Like, he's like, I'm not gonna let this little broken femur like get in the way of me doing this with this guy filming it. Like, it was, I mean, that was a thing, you know, like, this is the moment that all this stuff is built up to. I'm not gonna just blow it because my leg's broken. Like,
And I mean, honestly, like that was a pretty prevalent mindset around that time too. People would really, really go for it. And there was a reckless abandon there that paved the way for what we're seeing now, which is a much more technical reckless abandon, you know. But that video in particular was really kind of a hallmark and a benchmark of what could happen at the time, and you know, everyone in that video just suffered for the craft in a way that would be hard to describe to a normal human being.
Well, and ended up, like you said, I mean, that makes the end product that much better.
Truly.
With just from the mindset everybody's going into it with, not necessarily like what happened in it, but people going into it with the concept of, it doesn't matter what happens. We're going to do this and we're going to kill it.
Everyone that's ever watched BMX and skate videos knows the ones that you can feel, and then also knows the ones that you're just watching, you know, and that's on a short list of ones that you just feel. You know, there's a weight to it that you just can't really describe. There's a bunch of BMX videos like that. There's a bunch of skate videos like that. There's not that many, you know?
Yeah, that's cool. Do you have any, I mean, just from where you are now, you're, you know, like you said, you're always going to be kind of a part of it. Do you ever like kind of miss being that in that world and that scene and like the way that you were?
Well, you know, I will always love riding my bike. When I feel even remotely okay, it will always feel great to just go out and jump a curb, do some 180s, grind something, do a wall ride. I'll love that until I can't pick a bike up. But a mistake I've made a handful of times, and I don't necessarily, a mistake is the wrong word. A decision I've made a handful of times that hasn't gone perfectly is getting deeply, deeply immersed in the industry side of things that I love on a personal level. And BMX is my shining example of that. So no, in that sense, being as entrenched as I was, I mean, we pulled off a lot. I pulled off a lot. I mean, you know, at one point, a trade publication that was helping inform the industry went down. I decided that was an important venture, so we aligned with Bicycle Retailer and we made a trade publication. It was called Industry BMX Magazine. You know, we put those contests on ourselves. The company that I worked for in California grew so exponentially within the time that I was there that I was able to help really kind of like the brands that I loved the most were my friends' small, really art and quality driven brands.
Yeah.
And we were able to really kind of like wide scale launch them. You know, they existed and they were awesome before they ever found us. That's for sure. But now I had money and access. And so, you know, the amount of things that I accomplished in BMX, I'm proud of, I'm pleased for it, but it chewed me up and spit me out. And people that were quality driven like me were not, were not looked upon in a way that I wanted to stay in that industry forever.
I think that's a pretty common, regardless of what industry you're in. Because I have some friends, and you were actually in like you said, in the hardcore world as well. But I have some friends that are musicians and did some of the touring thing for a while, and still make music and still love it and still play local shows. But they're like, I just won't do the big time thing anymore because the music business sucks. And like on a corporate level, anytime something becomes like a big thing, and this probably was the case with something like CrossFit even too, like once it became so big that it was like a corporate machine, it began to dilute what the original messaging was of, you know, that fitness in 100 words that Greg came up with 25 years ago or whatever it was, that was like on its core was like a really beautiful way of expressing it, but it just became so diluted by the corporate version of what that became, especially once the games became a thing and all that kind of stuff. So I think that's probably a fairly similar example no matter where you are. Like once it becomes that big, it's going to suck a lot of the creative and a lot of the people that are the art side of it that push a lot of that forward. It's going to pull them away from it. And then you're just left with kind of this bland corporate machine, you know?
Everything you just said is 100% true.
Yeah. It's and when you kept saying, because the music example with my friends was just what kept coming to mind. And you know, and they did Warped Tour a couple of times, and like, you know, we're in that world, and he's just like, I won't do it again, man. I'm not going to mess with that again. It just is life sucking.
And in some ways that side of things, I mean, especially in hardcore, has ebbed and flowed and has kind of circled back. And now a lot of the bands that were bigger, they still have the reach based on some of the successful aspects of the internet and social media and stuff, but they don't have to jump through some of those more corporate hoops. And I've loved seeing that. So I do believe it is circumventable.
Yeah.
But it is also, it's a much bigger challenge, because once you do start gaining notoriety, you have to stay on mission. You have to stay on brand, because if you start getting baited and hooked by anything that's going to be shiny and maybe a little bit bigger than you anticipated, you know, that romance can turn sour pretty quickly. And I've seen that a lot of times too. We've had to make some hard decisions on that front, myself over the years.
With the gym?
Well, a little bit with the gym. My most specific example for it is with our brand Hell on Earth. We you know, it started as a production company and then turned into clothing and things like that. And at one point, not long after I moved to California, I was making adult money for the first time in my life. So we filtered some money into Hell on Earth, and for a while we had really great stuff and distributors in a handful of countries and stuff like that. And Hot Topic had expressed an interest in selling our stuff. And when we started investigating it, we were pleased and proud at the opportunity. But when we started investigating it, the hoops that you jump through, you know, if you make one mistake, if you put a comma where there's supposed to be a period, there was these clauses where they didn't have to pay you.
Oh, wow.
You know, they only had to carry your product for one season, and they had options to make this different thing of it and whatever. And we were just like, well, we know we're never going to be the biggest brand in the world and things like that. But at the end of the day, 30 years later, if I want to make a Hell on Earth shirt with somebody, I want to own that thing. Yeah. I don't want to think about, well, we're a Hot Topic brand, you know, like so we chose not to do that. Meanwhile, at that time, you know, the maybe 20 grand or 30 grand or whatever we would have made, you know, selling those things at Hot Topic for a season or two would have been life-changing for us, man. We're street kids, right. Man. We had nothing, you know, and so that sounded like something, but you really just had to frame it in a non-momentary way. And that's what we chose to do. And I mean, down the road, man, I wouldn't change that decision. That's for sure.
And the long-term thinking on that is something, especially during that time, like you said, where it would have been life-changing, right? Like, that's a difficult place to make a decision that's not going to affect, like, that will affect you very immediately in the way you weren't thinking.
But I mean, you know, while I would love to take credit for the supreme foresight, most of it is just that both Hardcore and BMX at that time had taught me to fuck corporate America. And right. if someone with that much money and clout and, you know, giant, you know, trade show displays built like graveyards and all this nerdy shit offers you money, you say no.
Yeah, totally. That's this. I mean, that was the scene, man. That was what you just. That's what you just did. Well, and this brings up a like kind of an interesting question in my head. Is there some level of that still with you when it comes to like what the gym is doing and like some of the opportunities that you've had?
Of course.
With the gym, is that still like a filter that you process things through? Of
course, it's something I always will process it through. Hardcore was not a bus trip for me, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, it got in there early and it got in there hard and right, and those types of mental frameworks and philosophies and perspectives. I mean, I don't know if I could beat them out of myself if I wanted to. I never turned down an opportunity. and I make the most out of every opportunity that's given to me, because we're not given very many, and we've had far more taken away than we've had given. But I'm not gonna bend the knee. I'm not gonna jump through a hoop. We worked with CrossFit on a very professional level for a while. Greg Glassman was a friend of mine, and that went about as poorly as it possibly could. On his side, not mine. We did exactly what we were supposed to do. But even that, like we didn't have to compromise to work with them. We brought them to our level. We didn't sink to theirs. We were their design house. We were printing in our commercial print shop for hundreds and hundreds of affiliates. And we had partnered with Greg on it. And, I've told about this before, so we don't need to rehash the whole thing, but, don't shake hands with that man, because he's got his fingers crossed behind his back. And that's what we did. And that's what happened. But even that, we did everything right as far as working with a corporation much larger than us, and we still got fucked. Yeah. So those perspectives never go away if they're really in there. And the thing with CrossFit, the only thing I would have done differently is I would have adapted my sensibilities and had some smart lawyer made me sign a piece of paper with him. But it wouldn't have changed how we did the business. It just would have changed how we entered into the business.
And it would have changed the likely end result of what ended up happening.
It would have dramatically changed the end result.
Yeah. And that brings up such a good point too, just about how important, I mean, in any avenue, not even just business, but the concept of just relationships and how much that will carry whatever it is you're trying to do if you're surrounding yourself with people that believe in what you're doing, but are just good people rather than having good opportunities. It's more about the people that you're around.
100% true, man. And to run back to Summer Strong for a second, I was so pleased and impressed and surprised at nearly everything I was met with down there. And so when you said that, that's the first thing that popped in my head is just the genuineness of even the people from Sorinex and Mike, one of their commercial guys that works with the military and does some flooring, took me around the entire facility, the manufacturing facility. He's busy, man. There was 100 million people there. He took me through a full tour of that place, and we talked and shook hands. And man, I was tip to tail. I was impressed at not only what they had, but who they had. Yeah. And it just goes right to your point there. It's perfect.
And I said this on, I believe we did like a wrap up podcast with the guys that I was staying with in the Airbnb down there, which looking back on it, probably wasn't as coherent as it could have been, because we did it when we got home on Saturday night at 2 a.m. After, all the whole weekend and that whole night. But I think and I said this to Brandon too, I think probably the best compliment that I could give to Bert just on the whole experience of that weekend was that it was an environment that I would want to bring my wife and my son to, not from the sense of go get nerdy on strength stuff, which that is the case there as well with some of the speakers, but just the environment is like such a welcoming thing. And like, it almost feels like this is a different family that I have. And I want my family to go meet this family over here kind of environment.
As someone that has felt that in ways throughout my life, I was extremely impressed and surprised that I felt it down there, because I really didn't think that I would.
Yeah, and it was kind of like was it kind of a last minute thing for you to decide to want to go down there?
Semi.
Okay.
It had been talked about, and then Brandon, man, talk about an amazing cat. But he basically said, "Look, you're coming to Summer Strong, and here's how it's going to happen." And then that's what we did. And he knew. We've talked a lot, and so he knew that on my own, that is probably not an autonomous decision that I would have made, and he made it for me, and it was 100% the right choice.
Is it going to be I know for me, it's going to be like yearly pilgrimage unless something abnormal happens I can't make it for, but that's going to be the thing now.
That's exactly what it'll be. Yep. Yeah. If I'm upright, I will be at that event.
Yeah. It was funny when I got back, because this was my first one as well. And when I got back, I was talking to my wife, and we have a 2-year-old, and we're like, kind of in talks of like if there's going to be another, right? Nothing's official, but he was born, his birthday was just this most recent Sunday. And so I didn't get to go 2 years ago.
Birthday.
Yeah, I didn't get to go 2 years ago because my wife was 40 and a half weeks pregnant that weekend.
Sure.
I wasn't going to just bail. And so
we'd be having a different conversation if you had gone for that one.
Right. And so I made this statement kind of as a joke originally, but it ended up kind of being serious because we're like trying to, it never goes according to plan in terms of timing, right? It's like, but if we could time it to where it's born, where the next one's born in the spring, that works really well. But I was like, we should try and have it a little earlier so then I can make it to Summer Strong. And she like just looks at me. She's like, we're not planning our children around going to Summer Strong every year. And I'm like, I'm just saying it could be like, let's do what we can. Like it was not good.
You may have just cut the most effective ad for Summer Strong that a human being could ever make.
That's so true.
I'm going to be your marketing agent on the last minute of this podcast.
That's so good. But I mean, honestly, like that was, like I said, I said it as a joke, but I want it to be a thing that I'm able to go to as many times as I can, as long as it's a thing, just from the environment.
And I mean, realistically, like I'd met a few of those people that were there. Some I hadn't met, but I'd spoken to quite extensively. Some I hadn't seen in a long time. Tony Blauer, the last time I saw Tony Blauer was at one of those CrossFit affiliate fests many years ago. And so in a sense, it also covered a lot of different bases that were all really interesting to me. Unless there's some level of resistance to it, I want to contribute what I can do to make that thing even better.
For sure.
I was looking at it, and I was talking to some people there that I really respect, that are longtime athletes and successful people and things, and hearing the newness of some of the concepts that I was conveying to them really just told me clearly that there's open ears for that, and I got to make that happen.
Yeah, and that was one of the coolest things, and we talked about it several times down there, but just how good, if you use it in the right way, how cool social media can be for the right reasons, if used properly, right? Because it can be a life-sucking force for many people if used the wrong way. It can be both.
It's so easy to have it be both. It's definitely been both for me.
Yeah, and everybody that I had met there was people that I had never met in person. I just known them through Instagram and online relationships because, South Carolina, I live in Idaho. I'm polar opposite sides of the country. Hardly anybody that was there is even in my part of the country. There's just not that many that I could even hang out with unless I flew somewhere. Right. But it was just and you were one of them. Like when we go down there and we just start talking, there wasn't this like awkward small talk, get to know you phase of the relationship. It was just like, hey man, how's it going? Like, how's this going? We talked about that. It was just like we had just fallen right into almost like a class reunion type of environment where it was just people we'd known forever, but really hadn't. So it was like, it was just a trip for me that whole weekend to feel like I was just in this world of people that I had known, but not met,
And that really is, I think, that the shining star of social media is making it feel like these conversations can be continuations of something and not just this weird quirky introduction like you had said. Right. I enjoyed that a lot. I mean, like someone like Derek Woodsky is someone that I had spoken with quite a bit on the internet about a bunch of different stuff. Like we've traded videos back and forth and things like that. And a couple of our conversations got cut short because there was 9,000 people looking for him, but that was a real treat. Yeah. I didn't have to go up and introduce myself. We just kind of, talked about what we needed to talk about. And so stuff like that was really, really excellent, really fun, different, and very surprising for me. It was cool.
And it just ties back into what we had mentioned a handful of minutes ago about just how important the people are in whatever situation or whatever endeavor you're trying. I mean, that's all it is. I would rather have the good people with me on, a not so great idea or concept that we're trying to pursue than have the perfect plan, the perfect thing, and have a bunch of people I don't want to be with.
Believe me, on so many fronts, I can absolutely echo that sentiment. Yeah.
and I don't doubt that at all. Just from some of the handfuls of stories that you've shared already. But yeah, it was just such a cool experience. And I'm just glad that I was glad that you were there too, that we got to share kind of that first experience and kind of
me too.
do the same thing together. It was,
and from a training standpoint, I always thank you. I agree completely. And from a training standpoint, something I say jokingly, but not really jokingly, is that if it made any financial sense, I would teach groups of 4 to 6, and that's the most I'd ever teach.
yeah.
And so it kind of falls in that same category as, look, if I want to handpick a handful of people that I know are going to work well together, that may improve all aspects of the process that we're engaged in,
Yeah.
And something else I joke about, and it may not even be funny at this point, is I talk about Willy Wonka-ing our gym. And, if I ever end up making any sort of adult money doing something, I never want to be this exclusive type nerdy, goofy club, but there needs to be a barrier to entry, and it needs to be effort and integrity and investment in the group and contribution. This thing is not a handout, and if you can't contribute, you should vacate. And so that's the kind of thing to me that's like my romantic vision of how this thing would evolve is really just, at this point, although we're evolving every single day and improving every single day, I know what we can offer people if they invest. And those are the only people I want to train now.
Right. Totally.
And we can take anyone in the world there. But they have to want to go. Yeah. I would rather train someone that needs it than someone that has it.
Yeah.
Never would I be a person that would be like, oh, there's that thoroughbred, I want to work with that guy over this person that's got a limp and whatever. It's the opposite. I want to build that person into what they can be. But they got to want to, and they got to understand it. And so, it's anytime you do get fortunate enough to be in a group where it all just feels right, man, it's kind of a gift.
And so that actually was a good segue, because I wanted to talk about, because you've been, I think more so, and timeline wise, I'm not entirely sure when it kind of really began for you, but it seems more recently, just since Brandon began with you a handful of months back, or however long ago it was, last fall or whenever, that your online world is beginning to become a little bit more of a thing. How has that transition kind of been for you, trying to go into that space? Because that's where I live, right? Basically is an online space. So I'm curious how your transition into that has gone.
Thanks. That's great. Like as far as our digital presence, it's been very strong for a long time. wolfbrigade.com has been a gigantic, a largely untouched resource of information for over a decade. And of our very specific number of posts on Instagram, there is no wasted words, there is no wasted content. So, and we have a gigantic YouTube channel, and it's all free. So our online presence has always been very strong. So we've gotten asked to do remote training and, quote unquote online training, things like that. But I never bit, because unless it was going to be done in a very similar way to what you do it, which is very small group, very specific, very engaged, I thought it was a bunch of BS. I had seen how people were doing it. We had signed some people up for certain things because we were curious and we wanted to try and help them improve. And if it was a way that was outside of our scope or something that someone was better at, we always point people to what can improve them the most. And what we largely found is that it was just recycled BS. If a trainer sends out a template program, someone that knows what they're looking at fucking knows that. So if you think you're fooling people, make sure you double check yourself. But so that then we started figuring out that with some of these kind of pre-built remote platforms, we could actually do assessments and curriculum priorities, just like we do in person. Anyone that comes in to train with us gets brought in privately, and we run through the curriculum priorities list. It's really basically each movement that we'll do within the curriculum distilled down to its basic pattern and positions, so that they know what they're doing when they get into class. They're not overwhelmed. They're not unsafe. We can address anything that's really glaring that we need to before they're in a group expected to do it. And then that really helps us manage the group well and keep everyone working to their ability. Not being able to do that felt disingenuous, because one of the only things that we've ever heard from people on the complaint side, a handful of years ago, our friend Omid at Breaking Muscle, website Breaking Muscle, put up a year's worth of our training. I had filtered him a previous year's worth of our training that we had on our site. And it's great. It still holds up. It's advanced and improved since then. But if someone were to go back and do that now, they would end up an expert generalist. End of the story. But one of the only complaints we got was that it wasn't enough. And so what I would commonly respond to is, if you perform it to your full ability, it is enough. And really, that was where the assessment phase came in. If we were going to send people training, or we were going to create a portal that we were going to put up what we feel is our best foot forward in training, we have to know that they're moving in positions that actually complement that process. And so the assessment is they videotape themselves doing this what is essentially our warm up list of movements, and then a couple other things that we added in because they're very important. And Matt and Heather that primarily run the site, and I'm on the site, of course, all the time too, but they're the primary movers on the site. Assess them, send back changes, and there's a discourse and interaction there that gets them positionally to where they need to be. And then they move into phase 2, which is then they actually have the program. Phase 3, as goofy as it is to say that, is some mace specific stuff, like a mace lifting for strength training protocol, something called violence insulation that's really short, but is just some days that are extremely martial athlete minded. Every day at our place is martially athlete minded. I'm diverting a little bit, but our people are phenomenally easy to teach martial arts to, because they're learning them every single day in strength and conditioning. But there's a couple pieces on the Subversive Fitness site that are really just kind of specifically tailored for that. Lots of creative, powerful ways to get off the ground, different types of implement usage and things like that. So although it was a long time coming, that platform is going great. Just like everything else we do, it's small right now. It's not going to be small for long. Once something catches on here, at some point soon, and I'm not sure whether it's going to be through just almost 2 decades of diligent hard work that I've done. Right. Someone like Brandon being such a great product and also just such a great agent for us, and or someone like Bo helping with the UFC that just really has to get them to bite down. Something's going to crack, and that site will be far busier than it is, but it's going great.
Cool. And I think I've mentioned to you in the past, but the YouTube channel is insane in terms of just amount of content. It's amazing. But also just from the aspect of, it's such a very well done teaching platform. Because when I was, when as I'm sure many people came to you through Brandon in the last handful of months, when he had first told me about what you guys were doing and that he was excited with me, he sent me the link to the YouTube video, to the YouTube channel. And when I was messing around with my mace, I had my staple small handful of movements that I would work on. And a lot of the ones that you teach are ones that I'd never done. And I would literally go into a training session, do my workout, but then I would set a timer for like 15 or 20 minutes when I was done. And I would just pick 1 or 2 of the movements in the ways that you teach them. And I would do, and it kind of goes back to like a rider trying to nail a trick, right? Like I would just sit there and do, I wouldn't count reps. I wouldn't have any idea how many I was doing, but I would just sit there and try to mechanically get into, practice those positions the way that you were describing them in the videos and stuff. And I enjoy training that way because I like learning the skill of something new. Right. And so like if there's ever a new, and it's not even like I like to do the new shiny thing, but I like to express those things in new ways and learn patterns and that kind of stuff. So I got super deep dive into that stuff. And now I can't remember some of the names that you call them, but the one arm press holding out in front, the bell up high.
Yeah. Like, so there's like the overhead one is just, mace overhead press or shovel press. And then the mace front press. And realistically, it's you wouldn't have seen those because I created them. No one had used mace for pressing and pulling. And so what we determined with that is that if someone is coming back from an injury and they need to mitigate load, If they need to find a tick on the dial that they can't find with a kettlebell or a mace to optimize a position in the shoulder, or to rebuild or avoid a position in the shoulder, I mean, the mace is perfect for that. There's a couple of little diagrams that we've made that are, when I say diagrams, it's me drawing on a board really poorly with crayons. Yeah, but a movement pattern for barbell is a straight line, and pattern and positional access for a mace is something that looks like an atom or something like that. So thank you for the compliment on the YouTube channel. Insane is the appropriate word, by the way. There's some really old stuff on there that's really interesting and funny to me at this point, but none of it is bad. And then a couple of the instructional segments where they all look very, very similar. Not too many people know this. I don't even know if I've ever said this to anybody outside of our place. The first one was 70 or 80 movements. The second one was 40 or 50. The first one, I was having a lot of physical problems a couple of years ago. I've had a really tough 10 years for physical stuff. A surgery messed me up. Some medicine messed me up after that to try and fix what they broke. And a lot of the residual pain and dysfunction had stayed with me most of that time. And so sometimes I just get really kind of hard-minded about stuff, and I'm just like, well, this is happening, and here's how it's happening, and that's that. So the first segment of that curriculum that we filmed was 70 or 80 movements. I filmed in 2 days, and I couldn't walk before even starting it. The only thing that I could do was move properly. I would pass out putting my shoes on. There was so much weird dysfunction in my leg and my foot. And pain. So I really had to set a goal for myself and achieve it. And that's one of the things that helped me stay sane at those times. So there's some insanity that went into that stuff. And I cut myself no quarter on any of it. If it wasn't right, I either redid it or omitted it. And so we obsess over presentation, and it's because we want people to use it as a resource to improve. And we also just like to kind of, in a way, I see it as honoring our people, because when you come to our place, not if, you'll see that no matter their body type or their experience level or anything like that, everybody in the room is moving exactly the same, and they're moving really, really well. And we take great pride in that.
Yeah. And this is kind of cool. It came up in a conversation I was having in a group chat, talking about, and it comes from more of the concept of like the influencer people, right? And I've always been a believer that a movement is defined, and I say movement like a movement of people, not like an exercise.
Yeah. Yep.
Like a movement of people is defined by the leader, but it's represented by the people that follow. And so doesn't, because you look at the crowd that's around, is going to tell you more about what's happening than necessarily the guy at the top. Right. And so that's a perfect example of like when you say everybody's doing the exact same thing, everybody moves the same. It's because the people are representing what you guys are doing. You've defined and put those things into place. But if you did that and then all the people were still janky movements and, it wasn't a cohesive unit like how you've built it out to be, it wouldn't represent Wolf Brigade very well. You know what I'm saying?
Very, very true, and something I think about a lot. And I am never the strongest person in that room. And in some levels, I may be the most technical, but I'm also not the best mover in that room. And I when I talk about this, I think about it. It kind of catches me off guard for a second. It always makes me a little emotional because I always run back to the first time that I was able to choke my instructor in California. And, we kind of sat there and had this like really kind of emotional moment. Because that stuff is heavy, but that's the way it works, man. If you can't duplicate and improve what you've done, then you really don't know what you're doing.
Absolutely. And from a coaching perspective, I mean, that's really all of it, right? Because I kind of came from, in my athletic background, I like to say I was the absolute most average of athletes. Like there was, and if that in college, like there was nothing. there was nothing special about my performance level. You know, I had friends that were national champion pole vaulters and all that kind of stuff, and, you know, some mutants that I was friends with. But, you know, I was good at a couple of things, and I did a couple of things pretty well, and that was about it. There wasn't anything spectacular, but I always gravitated towards, I understood the craft a lot better than I could perform it myself. You know, and that just came from where my physical limitations were, right? Like there was a point where I wasn't going to be able to do any more than I could do, but I understood it far past that point. And so when it came around to coaching it, it actually was a lot easier for me to coach it than it was for me to do it, which there's some level where like you need to be able to physically describe what you're doing and on a base level. But when you get into some things, you know, some of the best coaches in the world aren't the best at that thing. You know, they're just the best minds and the best communicators of that thing.
I agree. The only asterisk is at some point, while they may not have been the best right now, they've been under that
absolutely.
thing. They've worn that thing. That I believe is an indispensable part of the process. And one of the things that I've always kind of really, I guess I can very flatly say look down on is quote unquote high level certifications that offer a non-participation option. Because there is just a factual responsibility reality to knowing what you're putting on people, especially when it comes to program design and volume and things like that. And so, yes, I agree with you completely on all that. But the people, in my opinion, that are the best at teaching it and going over details of it, while they may not be at this very moment, they've worn that thing. They've had that suit on.
Absolutely. And what also tends to happen, that's the inverse of that, is that people assume, and then these people themselves assume that because they were the best in the world at something, that makes them the best coach at it. And that is absolutely not the case either, because
we've probably both seen far too many of those. That's one of the most curious things to me is believing that because you're a master of one, you're a master of all. I've heard people that have a very specific proficiency in one thing, most specifically martial arts, and even more specifically grappling, try and give people advice on things that are so unrelated to that, with a level of confidence and expertise that makes me think they're just completely fucking delusional.
And
it's really interesting.
And it's, I don't know if it's they're not understanding or they choose not to see it, but there's a level of, it wouldn't matter. Like that person's just a mutant, right? Like they were going to be the best in the world anyways. It had nothing to do with the program that they went through. Like it's because when you get to the super high level of stuff, it's just like, if you have a coach, that coach's job is just to not let you get hurt. Like you're not, that coach probably really isn't doing many things to make you better because you're already a freak. And
you know, but the snake eats its tail there because they can always be better.
Yes.
You know, when I look at the best people in the world and the things that I care about, even things I don't really care about, I know that I can improve them. However, you're right in the sense that most of the time they're so good that the people that they have around them are really just kind of sycophantic. They're not really contributing much more than mental accolade and back patting and things like that. I've had conversations with some of those that are trainers for some high level fighters, and that's a fascinating situation, because you're right. Someone is so good that the directive for those directly surrounding them is, well, just don't let them die, but then you think about, what if you added 10 more percent,
or even 2?
What if someone that really knows how to squeeze and really knows how to turn that dial could add 10%? I believe that's in there for anyone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know that you were talking to him a bunch down at Summer Strong, but one of my favorite analogies ever was one that John Wellborn gave, talking about the guys that play in the NFL. And because he's talking about, the chances of people making it to the NFL, of guys making it, it's literally zero. Like, I mean, you have a 0% chance of going there, because and the analogy that he gives is, he's like, barring some sort of like tragic accident growing up, like, cause it's not a secret that many guys in the NFL came from rough neighborhoods. Right. So he's like, barring some guy getting killed in a drive-by shooting, 95% of the guys in the NFL were going to end up there anyways. Like, it had nothing to do with what school they went to, had nothing to do with their training on the way there. Like, they're just that physically gifted that they were, that was their path. They were going to end up there because it didn't take hardly any work for them to get there. They're just naturally mutant humans that most of us, like quote unquote common folk, just don't comprehend like the level of athleticism and physical prowess that like some of these guys have. And so it makes you think so much differently about the way you structure training, because all you see is like those guys doing a training thing on Instagram. And then it's like, oh, I got to do that thing. It's like, well, first of all, you're not taking into account the 20 years of actual training that he did to lead up to this thing. And then also the fact that this dude, you're never going to be able to do it this dude anyways. Like, he's Superman,
Yeah.
Like,
they're the people that they make the movies about.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're not there yet. Most of us never will be.
Yeah, and it's just such a funny, like I said, because I in college was at a very small school in a very small division, but it was a weird, and this is kind of a tangent, but it's kind of a weird situation when it came to track. Because we weren't technically NCAA, we were NAIA division. But in track, the guys, cause it's times, right? You're looking at who's the fastest. And so it's very easy to compare the guys that we were running against to the guys that were the best in Division I at the biggest schools in the country. And many of the times are super comparable. Like, it's not like you're getting worse as you get smaller divisions, right? Like, at some level that may be the case, but there were guys that were just as fast as some of these D1 school guys that we were running against. And it's just such a fascinating thing. Like, these people exist everywhere, and there's no way that you can out-train that level of just physical ability that they were just given with at birth.
It's true, and a lot of people with optimized training, of course, nutrition and proper guidance, a lot of people can get really, really damn close. But you're 100% right. Sometimes there's just people that were put on this earth to move well, and they're a lot of fun to work with, man. But my goal is always to see if I can get the others to catch up as close as they can.
Yeah, well, totally. Well, and I think Brandon's a perfect example of that. Like 10 years ago, Brandon, like, you would say he's one of those dudes, like, he was put on this earth to lift heavy things off the ground, right? Because he was one of the best ever at it. But looking at what he's doing now with his training and just the physical transformation he's made, like, he's a different human altogether. Like, at a cellular level, he's a different human. And it's
one of the only cases I've seen of that going that well.
Yeah.
Ever in 20 plus years of engrossed physical culture.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think about just the damage that he's gone through with his knees and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's fascinating to me. So It's been a blast. Cool, man. That was a pretty rad place to kind of wrap things up. I had a blast talking to you today. I don't know. I mean, I could do this.
Me too.
I could do this for hours.
I hope people enjoy it.
Yeah,
it's going to be nice to see. It's going to be nice to see how your audience responds, and sure. I always appreciate people listening, and I appreciate this platform, man. This is cool. You're a smart guy, and you ask great questions, and
thank you.
I was excited about this.
Yeah, me too. I was, like I said, I was really glad that we got to spend some in-person time, just you and I, for those handful of conversations down in South Carolina, and kind of build on, the virtual relationship that we had, and now it's like now we've been hanging out in person. Now it's like a real thing. You know what I mean? And so
me too.
I'm looking forward to doing this more in the future.
Thank you.
And
anytime.
We'll do it again, man.
I look forward to it. And thank you all for listening. Thanks so much again, man.
Yeah, no problem.
Have a great day.